Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Confronting Caste. If you have been following our series, listening to our podcast, or dropping into our webinars, then today's guest will be a known figure to you. Joining us today from behind the scenes to behind the mic is Vignesh Rajahmani, who is a doctoral candidate at King's India Institute and the coordinator of the Confronting Caste series. Vignesh, a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Srilata.
So let's jump right into it. Vignesh, you have been working on your doctoral thesis, which is on the Dravidian Movement. And you've been looking at electoral mobilization based on caste. Dravidian Movement has been hugely influential in shaping caste dynamics and caste identity and caste politics in Tamil Nadu. But it is something that most Indians or even scholars of India who are not acquainted with the Tamil context have only heard of in passing and don't know a lot about necessarily in great detail. So why don't we start off with a sort of summary of what the Dravidian movement was and how that has kind of shaped the contemporary caste dynamics of Tamil Nadu, and what would be some of the key sort of take-home points that you would like the audience to know about the Dravidian movement and its impact on caste in Tamil Nadu?
It's an interesting question. Let's start with a few outcomes that we see today. Let's just say, the 2019 elections or the 2014 elections are two waves as we know it. But then, interestingly, the state has not even been touched. For instance, the BJP won one seat in 2014 and zero in 2019. And largely, there are studies and surveys and even data to sort of say what kind of a caste arithmetic has been in play with respect to how BJP's come to power. Be it Sean Rees, who calls it, a counter-revolution of the elites, or my own supervisor, Professor Jaffalo, who has actually spoken in detail or published in detail about how the caste arithmetic has worked. But that said, why has it not worked in Tamil Nadu then? Then there should be something about the quote-unquote caste dynamics here, or maybe there is something else that's happening. I'm fairly sort of new. I'm very keen to understand how regional parties shape regional identities. And more often than not, these regional identities have ended up being in a certain sense composite identities, especially with respect to the subalterns. So in that context, I did study Uttar Pradesh for my master's dissertation and now Tamil Nadu. So if I were to sort of look at the Dravidian movement or the DMK, in a certain sense, I see a composite identity cutting across caste. If I may say, it contains caste in a certain sense. And I always sort of stick to this line, which is caste system or caste is a beast that needs to be tamed consciously and almost on a daily basis. And I think the Dravidian movement does that. How much, how well is again a question, but it constantly strives to do that at the core of it. And so far, I think the performance has not been bad. And it's a very pragmatic movement. Let's just start from the Rudolphs, let's say, the influential paper of Rudolphs that talk about how caste associations in Tamil Nadu have been used as a means to empowerment or a means to democratize societies. The Nadar associations of the 1920s and 1930s have actually led to, or in fact, in my opinion, the Nadars are one interesting case study to see how coming together as caste can help in socio-economic empowerment and reduce conflict, and also ensure representation. A quote-unquote unseeable caste in the 1800s have suddenly become one of the best performing castes today. So Rudolphs have done extensive work on this. The 1 years also, today they have taken a different trajectory that we can come to later. But the 1 years of the past, of the 20s and the 30s, or all sorts of caste associations in those days. Even Robert Hartgrave has worked extensively on this. So caste is a social reality that's confronting India even today. So that is one marker that brings people together. So how do we use that to work towards socio-economic empowerment of the subalterns is one way that the Dravidian movement tried to crack or eventually enfeeble caste in a certain sense. And again, this Dravidian-Tamil identity, and I use it as a hyphenated identity, is essentially an antithesis to the larger Hindu, Brahmin, Aryan, Sanskrit, etc. And it's an accommodative trope, therefore. It conserves particularistic grievances as well. It is agile, it is fluid. In all honesty, anybody could be Dravidian or Tamil. Today, a lot of people who died, if you were to sort of take up a list of people who died in anti-Hindi agitations or in trying to sort of protect the language Tamil, many of them were quote unquote native Telugu speakers. So it is a very subscriptive sort of an identity. You could subscribe to it by believing in a few ideas. So it's a trope that's constructed. It's a capacious identity, and Tamil language has been seen as a means to empowerment, as a means to language, or a means to sort of resist, rather than if it were your mother tongue or no. I mean, a few people still say that. I mean, that's in a very puritanical sense. So caste dynamics, how has it shaped? I think it shaped it in a way that one can't reap benefits out of caste being an element or a means to pride. It can't be the case. So you can come together as caste, but then you have to give up on it at some point. There is a horizontal solidarity that's been in play so far and will continue to be, also, is my understanding.
Right. So you packed in a lot in that response. You talked about language and identity, and you also mentioned the DMK. So there are two questions that I have for you at this moment. One is, would you identify the DMK as the institutionalized form of the Dravidian movement? And how do you see both caste dynamics and electoral dynamics in Tamil Nadu departing from what is often projected to be a sort of pan-Indian Hindu caste order, and within that a certain caste-based electoral allegiance?
Well, DMK, it's a self-claimed political outfit of the Dravidian movement. I mean, that's how it's been defined. In fact, the Justice Party gets renamed as the Dravida Kazhagam in 1944 in the Salem Conference, and Anna Durai, who later forms DMK in 1949, in fact was the head in charge of the Salem Conference in 1944. And 5 years later, a few influential leaders from the DK decide that we need to go electoral. So in fact, there was a temporary impasse. Justice Party has always been an electoral force, and then there's a temporary impasse where Periyar said, no, we have to become a social movement. But then the DMK or the leaders in the DK eventually come back to sort of form again a political party to fight elections. So as I had mentioned in my first response, it is a pragmatic system, a setup, and that makes the party or the movement a lot more agile and accommodative. But then the one single thing that sort of kept them rooted is their allegiance to the ideologies as well. They have found ways to subscribe to the ideology in many different ways. They've missed on a few instances, but then they still strive to sort of subscribe to the ideology, which is also in a certain sense their own weakness today, that even if they'd wanted to, they can't move away a lot, or whenever they have in the past, those things come back to haunt them. There are instances that on top of the head of a lot of sociologists or political scientists, that just they pick that up, and then they could just go against DMK, which the DMK can't shy away or run away from. They just take those blows and go forward. That's because, again, they constantly stick to that ideology, and that's how it's essentially the making of a people and then the making of a party, rather than the other way around. So if I were to sort of look at the caste dynamics, it's essentially a movement of the subalterns, and it continues to be so. And in a certain sense, that's also the problem of a party, or a national party, be it the Congress in those days or the BJP today, that are not able to sort of make inroads. And the way in which the BJP or the Congress in the past or the BJP today are making inroads is by changing their means. So suddenly you do have a leader like L. Murugan, who comes from the lowest amongst Dalit castes, as the state leader. There's a certain change, I mean, in the way BJP approaches this. And in fact, the BJP in the recent past also has taken to those moves, isn't it? Even across India, they've taken to a quote unquote a subaltern person trying to be the face of their politics. But in Tamil Nadu, they're still not able to convince the Tamils that in spite of having a face, that's just not enough. Because here ideas matter a lot more than people, is what I understand. The tallest of leaders of the Dravidian movement have lost or have faced the worst defeats ever. Jayalalitha has lost her own seat. In fact, by far, it was only M. Karunanidhi who has managed to not lose elections. For that matter, probably he won the election, but then his party was reduced to 22 seats in one election. So in this context, the caste allegiance, again, any one particular caste is not a sole supporter of a given party. There's a cross-caste alliance, there's a cross-party alliance of people. And in fact, on that note, I can only think of a lament by this person called Anbumani Ramadas, a former union minister, and also tall leaders of the PMK, the Patali Makkal Katchi, the tallest party. The party draws a lot of support from the 1 years. In fact, 1 years are close to 8 to 10% at best in the state. At times, a few estimates place them at 12%. And there's a lament from him not so long ago saying, if only we were in UP, my father would have been the chief minister. So which actually says a lot about how the caste allegiances work here. So therefore, that supra-localness, supra-local identity, which forges a sort of a horizontal solidarity, is what sort of contains caste in a certain sense.
Right. So you've made this point a couple of times now that it cuts across caste lines, and individual caste groups come together in this kind of subscription to a particular ideology that is in resistance to Brahminical Hindu North Indian domination and its form of subaltern resistance. That's how you read it. So what do you think forms the base for this kind of solidarity across caste lines? And following up on that, what could probably be the fault lines in that solidarity?
Because this movement has always been rooted in the socio-economic mobility of the lower castes or the subalterns. It is always sort of foregrounded, mobility or upliftment. Right from the days of Justice Party, the leaders have always said, you don't have to worry about your language, culture, etc. Just try and sort of mimic Bombay. Go learn something new. I mean, be productive is, in fact, if I'm remembering it right, there's this person called Alfred Chatterton here in Madras Presidency at that point in time. The Justice Party leaders went to him and said, well, we do not want our hierarchical occupations. Teach us something new. Teach us some sort of skill. We want to break all of this. We want to be productive. We want to learn. And in fact, much before rice politics as we know it, there has been an education politics right from 1920. And in fact, when I say subalterns, it also cuts across genders. In 1920, women couldn't even vote. But then the Justice Party had an MLC, a woman MLC called Muthulakshmi Reddy. And today she's revered. She comes from the Devdasi community or the Isevelalar community. She's put up one of the most fiercest of fights against the hegemonic upper caste men at that point in time to fight the Devdasi system. And effectively, this movement has always been about dignity and agency. It's only about empowerment, and people start fighting their fights. And therefore, the movement can't produce a benevolent leader. There's still limits to that production of a benevolent leader. At best, you can create an MGR or a Jayalalitha. That's so far that this movement can push you through. But again, this again brings me to the question of the fault lines, which is, this is a perpetually subaltern cause, right? But then once you rise up, you would always want to move out. And at the same time, all of us can strive to accommodate everybody, but there could be a few cracks. So there are practically two sets of people that are moving out. One that have secured all of what they wanted, and they want, in this case, if I may use it in a liberal sense, a pan-Indian aspiration rather than a pan-Tamil Nadu aspiration. Move out and do something of that sort. Or rather, someone who's just missed out or not secured as much as they would have wanted. So these are the two fault lines that we face today when we were to look at the Dravidian movement. I think that's the problem that they've got.
How would you imagine Dalit, like Tamil Dalit identity, in relation to Dravidian identity? Are they separate? Is one subsumed within the other? Is there any tension there? How do you see that?
In fact, I just give some introduction, and then probably the word Dalit had come a little later into our discourse. But the word Dravidian or Adi Dravidas has been in play much before the word Dalit had come to vogue. So the deal again here is Ayodhidas, for instance, is one of the first people who comes from a quote-unquote Dalit caste, but he saw himself as a Dravidian. So the centrality of depressed classes within this movement is conspicuous and has been the case. And then Ratamla Srinivas, or anybody for that matter, MC Raja, Ayodhidas. So because of all of this, you see one of the first Dalit judges coming from Tamil Nadu. His name is Rajendran, if I'm remembering it right. No other state could produce a Dalit judge before Tamil Nadu. And then Periyar, the name was given, or the coinage was given by Ayodhidas, but then Periyar, being the expert marketer that he was, he took the word to everybody. So up until very recently, when I say recently, I mean 2, 3, 4 decades ago, everybody used to call themselves Adi Dravidas. or a lot of most of them, 18% of Tamil Nadu population is Dalits, and close to, even today when we see it, I mean close to 10% of them, 10 to 12% of them call themselves Adi Dravidas. I mean, I might be off by a few percentage points, but largely it's Adi Dravida identity. So in this context, what are the tensions? The tensions are always prevalent, right? I mean, because Tamil Nadu is not in an insulated island. So the tensions have always been there from the proximate OBCs, from the proximate lower OBCs, yes, but not to the extent as it was or as it is in the rest of the country. So the magnitude is a little lesser. And in that sense, the Dalits here are not dependent or are not looking towards or looking up to another person to come save them. In fact, on that note, the Harijan project was a failure here. It was either the Adi Dravidas or it moves straight, except for a few Congress pockets. From the Adi Dravida identity, it moves directly to the Panthers movement. So there's some kind of unassertiveness. In fact, Dalit protests or even the subaltern protests in the Tamil Nadu have been a lot more democratic than people think it to be. So in a certain sense, it's assertiveness. Right from the memoirs of Charles Ryerson, even till date, these subalterns have been very assertive. And in a certain sense, Periyar, in fact, in the late 40s, has actually gone to Dalit or to the depressed classes, federations, and then spoken. In fact, Periyar is one guy who spoke probably in every other caste association and then gone to them and then told them that, well, you are wrong. I mean, in fact, he was one of those leaders. If I were to see Ambedkar as a structuralist, Periyar is the most pragmatic, lieutenant of Ambedkar in a certain sense. That's my understanding. So in the 1920s, 30s, and early 40s, he goes to all backward caste associations and then talks to them. In the late 40s onwards, he goes to the Dalits and says, well, you guys are, doing good for yourselves, but then you don't have to depend on anybody. Ask, even if it's an OBC, so what? Even if he uses the Dravidian identity, so what? Ask them what he's going to do for you. So in that sense, the forging of that Dravidian bloc has been in terms of, mutual benefits and mutual coexistence. There are cracks, yes, I'm not shying away from that at all. And those cracks gave rise to a Panthers movement or gave space to that Panthers movement. And when that Panthers movement came up in the 1990s, in fact, a lot of, Dravidian movement supporters or leaders had actually helped in the forging of, the Panthers movement. When today's Tol Tirumavalan, when we see him, he's as much as a Periyarist as he's an Ambedkarite. In fact, he marries the two in the best possible way. And the way he stands rock solid with the DMK even today, in spite of people like Kamal Hassan trying to offer him seats or, the ADMK, he says, no, well, this is not, because he understands the gravity of what the stakes are and how meticulously has this identity been forged. So from the 90s, it's been a co-option of sorts. The Panthers also exist. There is also, now there are three different Dalit parties, the Ambedkarite Dalits or the urban Dalits, and then, the Devendra Kodavellalars who now don't want to be called Dalits. And then the Dalits amongst Dalits is the Arundathiyars. There are three different parties. They're trying to sort of forge alliances. Yes, they're working together. Please don't get me wrong. They're not antagonistic in that classic sense. But they're just trying to sort of, preserve their particularistic grievances and at the same time come together on broad convergence points.
So since you brought up the issue of political parties and since we are in election season, let's pivot into that and talk a bit about how these tensions and fault lines and different kinds of mobilizations map onto the electoral base of the two big parties, DMK and AIDMK, and then we'll come to the issue of Hindutva and BJP, of course. But to begin with, how does caste map onto those electoral bases?
The DMK and ADMK practically go to everybody. You don't have a specific caste group. I mean, you still see a few surveys here and there trying to say that, well, ADMK is backed by these two caste groups, the DMK is backed by these two caste groups, etc. But then if you were to sort of understand the caste composition of Tamil Nadu state, you would understand that there are not many big castes in Tamil Nadu. And the elite are reduced to less than 5%, or at best 10% as a non-Brahmin elite together. Even the most liberal of estimates would just say 10%, not more. So therefore, the least credit that can be sort of given is that these guys are forced to go to everybody. Even if one were to be cynical of the movement or of what it's done, the argument that can be put forth, or numerically sustainable argument that can be put forth, is they're forced to go to all caste groups. But then one can also argue, or it has been argued, that the composite Dravidian identity depends not on one or two caste groups. It can't. It has to be across a cross-section of communities so that you can manage them all at once. On that note, if you were to sort of see between the OBCs And amongst the Dalits, the DMK and the ADMK have members from practically all caste groups. Let's just speak about even the parties, even the Dalit groups that have seemingly forked from the Dravidian movement after the 90s, be it the Vidudalai Sirthigal, the Liberation Panthers Party, or the Pudhiya Tamilagam Katchi that draws its support from the Devendra Kula Vellalars or the erstwhile Pallars, or the Adi Tamilar Peravai, etc., that draws support from Arundadiyars. The DMK and the ADMK still have members from those or cadres from those caste groups, to the extent that right from the 90s, the speaker of the Tamil Nadu State Assembly is always an Arundadiyar, irrespective of whichever party it is. They have their cadres. So even if the list just came out, while the Dalit alliance partners have been given seats, the DMK is also fielding members in the reserved constituencies from those caste groups. And given the fact that it's a do-or-die election for the DMK, they would not want to risk it if they're not sure of their cadres, which also sort of, hints at how rooted they are. I mean, Ane Raja, for instance, a Dhanush Kumar who won in Tenkasi in the 2019 election, 20 years after, or even one or two decades, if I'm not wrong, the first time that the DMK is fighting from there. Especially in the 2014 election, the DMK did not even win a single seat. So in 2019, they're still trying to field, a person from the Devendra Kula community. And the Arundhatiya reservation that the DMK has brought in 2009. And this is the case with the OBCs also. The Vanniers are not just in the PMK. They are in the DMK, they are in the ADMK and any other party. The Thevars are not just in the DMK, they are in the ADMK also. They also have All India Forward Bloc also. They have their own parties. So it's practically a no man's land in a certain sense. You have to reach out to everybody, and then and that actually bewilders me whenever people say, it's just identity politics, etc. It's not so linear. If I were to give you a simple arithmetic, if you were to split the caste groups into numerically dominant, numerically non-dominant, socially dominant, and reserved categories, out of the 39 constituencies in 2019 Lok Sabha elections, there was only 14 seats where the numerically dominant and the numerically dominant were fighting each other. Otherwise, it was always a mix of castes that were fighting. It was at times it was a numerically non-dominant person winning the election. If you were to take the reserved seats out, 14 plus 7 is 21. So practically 50% of the seats are not fought in the conventional identity politics sense.
So what you're describing really poses a challenge for electoral analysts from the Hindi heartland, who are used to, positing easy caste equations in these senses. But it also poses a challenge then for a party like the BJP and for Hindutva ideology, right? And they have to kind of rethink their conventional strategies. So what is happening on that front? What is your reading of Hindutva inroads into Dravidian society?
I mean, I'm not sure if they are a dominant electoral force, or if they will be able to be a dominant electoral force in the foreseeable future. But that said, they always work on a 10-year timeline or a 20-year timeline. So they're very persistent people, or even patient people, if I may say that. But that said, it's again a meticulously forged identity, isn't it? So the first step that you take is to delegitimize it. And that they're very good at. In all honesty, I had this straw poll analysis of sorts with close to 600, 700 car drivers in the 5 years that I've been in Delhi. Almost every other day, I've made notes for almost 700, 800 drivers, just 4-line notes. I've asked them, what are the 5 reasons, or give me 5 reasons why you hate, someone like Rahul Gandhi. And believe it or not even a single person could give me 5 reasons. I mean, that's again because it's an image decimation, a delegitimization. You start coming up with lies. You just keep saying those same lies. The best example can be Gandhi wanted Patel to be the first Prime Minister of India, while Gandhi died in 48, Patel died before 51, and then Nehru became Prime Minister in 51. How can one dead man want another dead man to be the Prime Minister? But the deal is, this is the kind of push that you do. And then there is also space, isn't it? I spoke about the 2 fault lines. One of the people who have secured enough or want to move out, and the other, the people that have not secured enough. The example of the people who have not secured enough can be seen in the form of the Devendra Kula Vellalars or the Arundhadiyars, who are the 2 parties that are backing the BJP today. Or from the OBCs, you can see a section of the Thevars and a section of Vanniers that are backing the BJP today. And if you want to talk about the winners, you can consider a section of the Hindu Nadars. That's because of the sub-regional conflict that they have with the Christian Nadars, that they're moving to the BJP. Or the quote-unquote elite, the mutt leaders of the 1960s, 50s and all. But they're all dislodged from their spaces. So they're backing the BJP up. The erstwhile Vellalars, the Karayalars, the non-Brahmin elite. And of course, yes, a section of the Brahmins. I would not say or the entire Brahmin communities back in the BJP. That wouldn't be right in my understanding. A section of the Brahmins, yes, they are. Again, if you were to sort of give it in the form of a number, it's still a small percentage, but that's their in. So how they're going to push this further? For instance, if you were to look at this election, what they're doing currently, they've secured seats from ADMK. They've only secured 20 seats. The Congress has gotten 25 from the DMK, so practically they are equal. And the BJP has asked for seats in the Kanyakumari region and in the Coimbatore region. Coimbatore was where there was 1999 Coimbatore blasts, a radical Islamic group. And in Kanyakumari, you have the Christian Nadars. So that's therein. I mean, this has been the case in Kerala also, isn't it? Kasaragod and all, Kannur. And even in Karnataka, the Mangalore belt, where you have your Narayan Katils and all, isn't it? So yes, there is an in, but this again is a test for how much can this entire ideology that's been internalized by people, how much can it resist? So far, it has been able to resist. But for how much longer, we'll have to sort of see. I don't want to sort of predict time. I don't have a crystal ball.
Well, speaking of ideology, I think you've made the point quite strongly that the Dravidian identity is essentially an ideological identity. So, which thinkers, philosophers, scholars do you find useful in thinking through the ideological basis of Dravidian identity and in making sense of everything that's going on in the contemporary times?
I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, in a certain sense, I'm not keen on grounding myself with one thinker. I think we are on the same page on that note. I mean, I think we had this conversation before. But then Ambedkar is the first person that I'd always sort of, resort to in understanding. An Ambedkarite lens to looking at the Dravidian movement helps you understand a lot of what many people don't understand it. For instance, a quote-unquote Delhi-based journalist wouldn't understand half of what's happening in Tamil Nadu because probably he doesn't even have to understand the Tamil language. But as long as he's read or he or she's read Ambedkar enough, I think what's happening in Tamil Nadu wouldn't be difficult. The rise of Tirumavalavan will tell you how an Ambedkarite and a Periyarist are not two different people and how they can sort of, embed themselves in this space. Ambedkar is one person, and then you can always talk about Savitribai Phule, and then probably a bit of Jyotiba Phule, because you also have this rereading of conventional texts, conventional Puranic or old antique texts, or as a rise of the subalterns against the hegemonic class. I mean, I think Jyotiba Phule's reading of Shivaji is a lot different from today's reading of Shivaji, isn't it? So in that sense, Jyotiba Phule helps, but Savitribai Phule helps you to understand how Muthulakshmi Reddy fought her way through. Foregrounding education. A few journalist friends that I know here all observe Savitribai Phule's birthday as the Teacher's Day. And then Lohia, again, to sort of reclaim, for instance, Bharatanatyam is always seen as this conventional hegemonic art form. But here there is also a line of thought that says Bharatanatyam is actually an art form of the subalterns. Or even Carnatic music in a certain sense. T.M. Krishna has spoken extensively about this. Nritya Pillai speaks extensively about Bharatanatyam. And again, if I may say, there's a lot happening around us and we are in such a dynamic space. There's so many things, So I sort of try to use theories based on need. I'm not sure how conventional academics sort of would look at this approach of mine. Weber, let's say, Dumont, William Connolly, Nancy Fraser. Nancy Fraser is the best theorist that you can sort of live by. Whenever people ask me about what Dravidian movement stands for, as far as you know, because in a certain sense, I've been a nomad all my life. I was born somewhere, brought up elsewhere, did my study elsewhere. And so Tamil Nadu was in a certain sense new to me as well when I started studying it. So Nancy Fraser helped me a lot. The three words that I say is recognition, redistribution, representation. That's exactly what this movement's been fighting for. And when I met Tirumavalavan vicariously, that's what I heard. I'll tell you about the vicariously later, but the deal is, so that's what I heard from him as well. And agency and dignity, these are the things that Nancy Fraser also talks about. And Michael Herzfeld, for instance, an anthropologist from the US who talks about cultural intimacy, he helps. William Connolly helps in understanding this movement as a politics of becoming, and how the churn is constant. Today's Dravidian movement can't stagnate. If it stagnates, it dies. It's a movement that needs to be constantly sort of, worked at. One misnomer, one wrong press conference, and then the DMK is pushed practically into the corner for a good 10-20 days, even if it's from a tall leader. And Arjun Appadurai, capacity to aspire is one theory. This is useful. And Sami Smuha, Chantal Mouffe, Peter Ostigi, I can just go on. Partha Chatterjee. So yeah, these are the thinkers that I...
But I love that you're thinking of characters so eclectic.
Thank you.
Right. So Vignesh, you talked about the Arundhatiyar community on and off. Could you tell us more about the basis of identity formation for the Arundhatiyars and how does that relate to the question of Dalit Bahujan solidarity?
In fact, Arundhatiyars were erstwhile called Chakliyars, or in fact they're the Dalits among Dalits. That's how they call themselves. That's how they've been treated also in the caste order. They fall very low in the caste order. They engage in leather tannery work, pig tending, and manual scavenging. And in a few cases, they're also sort of subject to oppression, not just from the other backward castes, but also from the upper Dalits. There have been instances like that as well. But that's again because of the social order. And there's also another problem that they have. The distance between them and their proximate OBCs today, which is not even OBCs, let's call them backward castes or relatively upwardly mobile backward castes, the Kunguvela Kaundars or the Nayakars. The Nayakars are in a certain sense upper caste as well. The distance between them is too much. So they're not like the Parayars versus the Banniyars or the Devendra Kulavelalas versus the Thevars, where there's some sort of a convergence. But with respect to Arundhatiyars, what happened was in the 90s, the Adi Dravida identity was not really giving them much. But again, they're also being branded as non-Tamils, etc. But their history tells us that, the history that they claim tells us that they've been taken to the Telugu kingdom. They are originally Tamils. They're originally Tamil kings, and then they've been taken to the Telugu land or the Kannada land, and then they've been brought back, etc. So they find a commonality, or they weave a common thread between the Madaris of Karnataka, the Madigas of Andhra, and the Arundhatiyars of Tamil Nadu. So again, because of this sort of a socio-economic setting, they were not really getting much from the reservation as well, because there are only so many seats that can be given out in the reservation, and therefore there was also subcategorization that was given to them in 2009. It was not an entirely new act. I would say it was a bold move, but it was not an entirely new act. It was modeled on the lines of a bill that was passed in the Punjab Legislative Assembly in 2006, if I'm not wrong. And now we do see some mobility amongst them, better mobility amongst them, yes. And they're more assertive. They have been relatively more assertive than the Madigas or the Madaris, but then now they're doing better than before. But then they also have a problem from the Tamil nationalists, or the pseudo-Tamil nationalists, if I may say, because in a certain sense, progressive leaders like Thirumavalavan, progressive leaders in the DMK like A. Raja or a Kanimoli, even they claim to be Tamil nationalists in a certain sense. Tamil can't be taken away from the entire Dravidian politics. So the pseudo Tamil nationalist fringe group calls them Telugu speaking, etc. They're subject to persecution, etc. But the Dravidian parties, at their capacity, they've been close to 35 MLAs so far from the 1950s, which is less. I'm not saying that's a lot, but this is what they've been given. And then, like I said before, the Speaker of the House has always been an Arundhatiyar, be it from the DMK or the ADMK. And very recently, Andiyur Selvaraj, one of the 3 DMK MPs that has been elected to Rajya Sabha, was an Arundhatiyar. So there's an active effort that's been taken constantly. But then that's not enough. And they have all the rights to say what's enough and what's not enough, because it's their future. So on that note, they have their own parties, they have their own formations, they have their own interest groups. And as a counter to the allegations levied, they call themselves the Adi Tamilars, that they are the original, the aboriginals, the original Tamils, etc. So that is a socio-cultural battle that they put up. And even there are some very sharp Ambedkarites and Periyarists amongst Arundhatiyar community that many a time don't take the center stage. But because I've been on the field, I've interacted with a few of them, and they have some absolutely amazing understanding of how caste system works. And in fact, the way they quote Ambedkar and Periyar at the back of their minds, as if all of what they're saying is something that Periyar and Ambedkar practically told them in person. So it's very intimate also, the way they appreciate. In spite of so many inherent structural reasons for this fight to go through or to be furthered, and an entire political discourse or an entire politics wanting to further this, the Dalit Bahujan solidarity is still a lot more stable than it is elsewhere. In fact, I'd only like to sort of quote Amit Ahuja's book, which is recently won the New India Foundation Prize, which is to say that, well, he takes Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu on one side and UP and Bihar on the other. and it's a US PhD, so there's data, so sorry. Therefore, I'm quoting him, which is to say, in states where the Dalit movements have been strong, the socio-political Dalit movements have been strong, and where they have negotiated with the subalterns, the other subalterns, the politics of Dalits has been mainstreamized. So now the demands of the Dalits and the demands of the lower OBCs are not different. So therefore, there are so many more reasons to come together. But unlike UP and Bihar, where it's become an exclusivist club good of one or two parties, so therefore you have strong parties but not strong movements. So that's one difference that I see. And another example is when Anita died. Anita is a student, for people who don't know. Anita is a young kid who basically committed suicide in the wake of an entrance exam, the NEET, the National Educational Entrance Exam, which has made a compulsory test to secure medical admission. So she tried and she did not get through. There was a lot of political back and forth, and eventually she succumbed to pressure. And I mean, I'd actually want to stand corrected there. In a certain sense, she put up the best of fights, and I think she again lost her life to the fight. And when that happened across Tamil Nadu, unlike the Hathras case, let's say, if I were to sort of compare both, unlike the Hathras case where it was just a Chandrasekhar Azad that was trying to come out and fight, or a Mayawati to a certain extent, in her own very limited sense. In Tamil Nadu, they were practically every other college student, an arts college student, science college student. Anita became the sister of Tamil Nadu. She did not have to be an upper caste girl to be Tamil Nadu's daughter or Tamil Nadu's sister. She was treated as Tamil Nadu's sister. Even today, she's treated as Tamil Nadu's sister. Whenever they call Anita, they still say Anita Tangachi, or Anita is a daughter for everybody. That is one, if I were to sort of... And the other thing is Tirumavalavan himself, the way he won the 2019 election. It was practically a one-year bastion, in a certain sense, the seat that he was fighting. And he being the leader that he is, the other MP from the VCK, Ravi Kumar, could afford to fight from the DMK symbol. But Tiruma has a lot more going on, so he can't, so it's not so easy to pick up the DMK symbol for him, because he's also a tall leader, etc. He took a different symbol, a new symbol that the election commission allocates just weeks before the election, or less than a month if I'm not wrong. But Tirumavalavan, the way he won that election, in fact, in all honesty, Ponparapi, the one village, there was violence against the Dalits, stones thrown at Dalit houses, etc. So before the election, the pot was his symbol, electoral symbol. The DMK cadres, who also belong to the Vanniers and the Dalits, mixed bag, right? They all campaigned for Tiruma. It was a 3,000 vote difference. It was a few thousand votes difference. But still, to secure that victory, what practically happened was, I still have photos, I went to field. The pots were painted black and red, which is the DMK flag. And Shivashankaran, who is the district secretary there, I read this from an Indian Express article, who was the district secretary there, who himself is a Vannier, who went against his own community. The Vannier Sangam that backs the PMK had practically passed orders against Shivashankaran, but he still said no. I mean, this guy is a Tamil leader, what are you saying? And the election was fought, the election was won. So these are two instances. Yes, there is a Shankar death case, yes, but there is a price that you pay. There is a public shame while reaping caste benefits here. After, a Hathras accused tomorrow can become an MLA MP elsewhere. Yeah, here you can't. There's a price that you pay, and that price is that public shame. You can't reap caste benefits out there. It's just not possible. And in fact, Karthik Ram Manoharan calls it politics of containment. So you appropriate the caste leaders. Karunanidhi, when he was off power, he was practically writing very, very sober biographies of these caste leaders, and in amazing Tamil. So today, while all you have is only like nice Tamil lines, but you don't have any pride in those caste leaders' names. You only have sacrifice, things like that. So you can't really weaponize them so easily. These are two instances that come to me when I speak about, Dalit Bahujan solidarity. Tirumavalavan leads a protest, the DMK backs him. DMK leads a protest, Tirumavalavan backs the DMK.
Well, finally, Vignesh, before we sign off, how do you see the future of Dravidian politics, electoral politics in Tamil Nadu, but also politics of the Dravidian movement, and how do you see the future of annihilation of caste in the Tamil context?
I still stick to my first line. I think caste in the foreseeable future continues to still present itself as a beast that still needs a lot of taming, a constant conscious taming, rather than, or I'm not sure if we are equipped enough to annihilate it yet, at least in the next decade or so, because maybe we've made a good 5-6 steps towards it, but today as we see it, there are also 4-5 steps on the other side. So I think there needs to be a relearning, a revisiting, some unlearning in a certain sense. I mean, this is again me being a lot more practical, if I may say that, if I may use the word. Yes, but then at an ideational level, the goal needs to be annihilation. Well, the reason why I started with taming is because the outcome could be probably taming. But if you start to plan towards taming, there's no way that we're going to go.
Something that we lose sight of sometimes is that equal mobility is not the same as annihilation.
Exactly. Yes. In a certain sense, mobility or equality of opportunity is one step towards bringing that state of mind towards that annihilation. So even in the first case, mobility is just one step. So when I say socioeconomic mobility, that's probably what's helping us keep focused on the target, but doesn't mean we've sort of we are about to hit the final nail in the coffin of sorts. But that said, it's a tricky question that you ask, because Tamil Nadu as a state, in fact, is challenged on many fronts. Socio-political ethos, for instance, is being challenged. But again, the deal is, as long as the churning is from the below for more space, all of that needs to be accommodated. That's not something new to the Dravidian mobilization. There's always been churning in the bottom, so that there's a lot more space, there's a lot more assertion, etc. Even, for instance, the assertion by the transgenders. The Pride March in Tamil Nadu recently started having Periyar and Ambedkar photos the last 3-4 years. So that churning is completely important.
Was the case before? Because I think a lot of Pride marches, like the demand for rereading 377 or doing away with Section 377 is rooted in this constitutionalist ideal, which of course has a kind of Ambedkarite base to it. So was that not the case before?
No, I mean, if I'm recollecting this right, I think Pride March has been happening for a good 10 years. And I think only 5 or 6 years before did they start coming up, at least in Tamil Nadu. And then the DK also, the Kazhagam also started talking about it. And then the DMK is now sort of talking about it. It's become a proper, grassroots social movement, and now being accommodated here. And again, coming back to the answer, there is also a problem at a very financial dimension. The federal ethos of the country are also sort of being curtailed in a certain sense. There's not enough financial autonomy within the constitutional framework. So how much can you sustain? Because at the end of it, all the development that Kerala and Tamil Nadu talk about today is because of that fiscal autonomy within the federal ethos. So if it's going to be one policy for all, how are we going to match this is one question. And then after the GST, the ability to sort of generate more monies come down. So how much do you push is one question. And again, the caste association of the 1920s are useful lessons that can be revisited, because today's caste associations are another game. I don't even want to get into them. But yeah, the caste associations today is one problem. Again, such composite identities are being hated upon. Suddenly they say, are you a pure Tamil? Are you a pure Hindu? And then they say, are you a pure Hindu Tamil? And I said, well, why do we need to have that prefix called pure? I mean, where are you taking us? Like I said, many people that died in the anti-India agitations were Telugu speaking, quote unquote. So the Arundhadya community today are being thrashed by the sub-regional fringe group called the Nam Tamilars, because they think these guys are Telugu speaking people. But then there's a lot of migration that has happened. I mean, Tamil Nadu is not Tamil Nadu as we know it 200 years ago. So that's one problem. But again, some pragmatism is key to hold all of this. And my understanding of that pragmatism comes from Tirumavalavan, again, the way he understands it. And the way he stays away from binaries. Suddenly, there are these questions asked to him saying, well, everybody says DMK to be a party against BJP but not against caste. Or your alliance is against BJP, but are you actually fighting caste? And then he says, and that's an interesting line of thought that he followed. I mean, what is BJP? Or what do we know of BJP? Or even Hindutva as an idea? It's essentially a religion or a weaponized variant of a religion, and then which sort of roots itself in caste. So how can one be anti-BJP or anti-Hindutva and not be anti-caste? So such binaries need to be sort of fought. The idea is
purported separation of Hindutva from Hinduism, or the BJP from the RSS, or from all of that complex from a so-called pure Hindu religion is entirely...
Yeah, the Jataka tales tell us of how bad the rulers of those days were. I mean, as we know, the golden age of Gupta era to be, it also involved a lot of violence. That doesn't mean that we go completely against the Gupta Empire, but the idea is to be aware of it and to sort of move further and then talk about it. Today, if there have been cracks in Tamil Nadu, yes, there is. I mean, in fact, 2 days ago, when Hugo spoke, he spoke about caste atrocities in Tamil Nadu. They are a reality. But then the deal is, how do we move forward? In fact, again, I go back to how a leader like an M.K. Stalin or an A. Raja immediately rushed to a spot where there was caste atrocity, or even Thirumavalavan for that matter, how he rushed to a spot and spoke about, a composite culture of Tamil. If I'm not wrong, there is a Nadar and a Dalit fight somewhere, and there was a death also involved, or an attempt to murder, if I am not wrong. And he went there, and the way he presented himself, he presented himself as this Tamil leader. And today, Thirumavalavan is not a Dalit leader. He's a Tamil leader. That doesn't mean he's a less of a Dalit leader, no. His particularistic grievances are still there. He fights Manusmriti in the best possible manner. But that doesn't mean he doesn't go to a temple. He also goes to a temple. He comes out of it. But the deal is to sort of, live the complex realities of life, or transcode the complex realities of life even in your politics, rather than to cite facile reasons to complex problems, And I'm also worried about how there is this entire generation of quote-unquote apolitical people, or the generation that was born post-1970s is where I could trace this back to, suddenly become so disenchanted with politics. Satish Deshpande has an explanation to this. He says the rise of subalterns caused this. But this disenchantment is actually prevalent among the subalterns also. Anybody who's educated today.
Realization, and there is a certain currency based on this politicalness.
Yes, so this apolitical ness, as you said, is actually a gateway towards spreading this facile, binary-based politics. Suddenly you sort of say, you can practically say anything and everything and get away with it. Because people are not rooted. You can always come back and say, well, this happened, that happened. Do you know? You can have practically 7-8 WhatsApp messages even to the most literate of person, as we know, or most educated of a person, and still sort of find your way out. And that's exactly what today's technological advancement has shown us. The movement, as I studied it, I've not lived through it. In a certain sense, my parents have probably lived through it, but even they've been out of Tamil Nadu for a while, for a good period of time. So we've not lived through it. I've studied it as I saw it. So therefore, it is as real as anybody's life would be. So it's got its blemishes, it's got its high points, but then there is a constant yearning to sort of strive towards being this. So for instance, why does a DMK or even a Thol Thirumavalavan, forget, it's okay. I mean, even a DMK probably is a 39 Lok Sabha seat party or a 234 state assembly party. But why would a Thol Thirumavalavan want to sort of actively fight against Manusmriti or even fight against the CAA and RC, just practically at the other end? Or why would a DMK want to lead, or even the ADMK at that point in time, want to lead the interstate conferences and, strive hard towards bringing center-state relations discourse into the main field? Why did they not want to implement emergency? It would have been so easy, to take the Bal Thackeray route. Why did these guys not do it? Why do we still have, VP Singh Kalyana Mandapam here? Or why is there a Sheikh Abdullah Bhavan in Kodaikanal? So why are many people named Roosevelt, Garibaldi, or Lenin, Stalin? In fact, why are they named like that? And why is, Madurai's temple, one of the biggest temples, Madurai's temple's head festival also co-led in the name of a Muslim? Or two caste groups, one Tamil speaking, one erstwhile Telugu speaking, and a Muslim come together to run this. And then there is also a temple where people just get pissed off with the god, throw cow dung water at him just because there are no rains. It's so intimate here. And then they say, well, you are God, bring rain and then take your bath yourself. So these are the fair points. I mean, these are the high points. But again, in fact, Niranjana, when she pointed out the fault lines really well. Well, this is the problem, right? Tamil Nadu is also one of the states that's attempted a coexisting space called a Samatvapuram, where Dalits and OBCs were given accommodation in the same place. But it's also the same city or the same state that has promoted or that has basically displaced a bunch of slum dwellers and thrown them out of the city. So good, bad, ugly, you have all, but then it's still electorally resisting hegemonic forces.
You have been listening to Confronting Caste. During the academic year of 2020-2021, we will be releasing fortnightly episodes of this podcast that you can listen to on all major hosting platforms, including SoundCloud. To know more about our panels, seminars, and workshops, visit kcl.ac.uk/KII/events.